So first off, what is CTE? Well, CTE is a neurodegenerative disease. It falls under the classification of a tauopathy, which means hyperphosphorylated tau protein in the brain. There's over 20 different types of tauopathies. The most well-known is Alzheimer's disease, which is a collection of tau protein as well as beta amyloid plaques within the brain. It can only be diagnosed currently on autopsy. However, we are starting to make strides into being able to see tau deposition in life through PET scans. It's still quite early stage, but obviously there's strides being made in that, so I'm not going to get into that. So far, you can only be diagnosed with these types of conditions, Alzheimer's, CTE, post-mortem, so after death, okay? There's the initial point. 20 different types of tauopathies. Alzheimer's is the well-known. Tau is a protein that is located within brain cells themselves. Within the neurons and axons, you have this protein called tau. It is a structural protein that helps to hold the structure of the neuron itself. If there's damage to the neuron, potentially due to reactive oxygen species, inflammation, biomechanical damage, activation of glial cells, and apoptosis or cell death, that tau protein can aggregate and clump into what's called neurofibrillary tangles. Okay, so that's a collection of hyperphosphorylated tau, and it's called neurofibrillary tangles. In Alzheimer's, you have neurofibrillary tangles, but you also have these beta amyloid plaques. In CTE, you don't have beta amyloid, but in some cases they found it anyway. But you have these neurofibrillary tangles, and they're located at specific areas of the brain. The differentiator between what CTE is and what Alzheimer's disease is the patterning in which this stuff appears. In CTE, these plaques, these tangles tend to appear at what they call the depths of the sulci, or the sulci, however you want to say that. The brain has these kind of grooves and valleys within it. At the bottom of the valley is called a sulcus or a sulci. At the top of it is called a gyri. So at the base of the sulcus, when you cut the brain in half, and you can see at the bottom of these sulci, there's these neurofibrillary tangles around that area, kind of at the border from white matter to gray matter. It's also around blood vessels. So you have this tau deposition around small blood vessels in the brain. The theory behind where that is and why that is because that's the point of stress and strain during head impact and concussion. Okay, so everyone following me? So it's a patterning thing. In Alzheimer's disease, those plaques and tangles tend to be deeper within the brain. So not necessarily at the outer cortex like CTE is, but more diffusely spread throughout deeper areas of the brain. That's the differencing in the patterning, okay? So tau protein can happen in a variety of diseases. Like I said, there's 20. When we talk about what CTE is in terms of its patterning, we have to also consider other potential diseases that are already out there. So there's a couple of them that have very similar pathologic criteria to CTE, and they're simply related to age. As we age, things degenerate. Okay, Alzheimer's, there's no necessarily one cause of Alzheimer's disease. They're touting inflammation as a potential cause, and some other things, but here's some that are just related to age. Primary age-related tauopathy, PART. It is characterized by neurofibrillary tangles with no beta amyloid plaques, which may or may not be associated with cognitive impairment. Same thing as CTE, same type of diagnostic criteria. You have the tangles but no plaques. Then you have age-related tau astrogliopathy, which is ARTAG, A-R-T-A-G, and that is phosphorylated tau located at the depths of the cortical sulci, just like CTE, and also found around small cerebral blood vessels, just like CTE, found in people with no history of head trauma, and it's completely just related to age. So then you have to ask yourself, how many of these conditions, how many of these brains of these former athletes that we're opening up just have one of these other things that we're automatically attributing to concussions or head trauma, when in fact it may just be age-related changes? Okay, so we have to ask that question. Tau accumulation can happen in the brain for no apparent reason, okay? And problem number 2, it can happen in a very similar pattern to CTE. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we know this isn't the other conditions? Okay. The second question is, if these conditions are different, let's say they are distinct conditions, CTE is something over here, ARTAG, PRTA, or PART are different conditions from one another, then the question is If those conditions can develop and tau protein can get deposited in the brain without head trauma, and then we find CTE over here, how do we just assume that that tau protein is then related to head trauma? Right? Tau can happen in 20 different conditions in the brain with no history of head trauma. And then over here, we see tau, and then we automatically assume that it's head trauma. It may not be related to head trauma at all. We have no idea what it could be related to.